I never believed in this kind of stuff before it happened to me. Near-death experiences, seeing the light, all that. It sounded like something people made up to cope or to get attention. But when you go through it yourself, well, everything changes. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened to me in Iraq. No embellishments, no religious agenda, just what I experienced. You can make of it what you will. My name is Eric Dennison. I was a staff sergeant with the 3rd Infantry Division. This was 2005, my second deployment to Iraq. The first one had been during the initial invasion. This time we were in the thick of the insurgency. IEDs, ambushes, the works. By then, I'd been in the Army for almost 7 years. I wasn't some wide-eyed kid anymore. I'd seen combat, lost friends. I thought I understood what war was. Our base was just outside Tikrit. Every day was pretty much the same routine. Wake up, gear up, roll out on patrol, come back, sleep, repeat. The monotony could almost make you forget how dangerous it was. Almost. My squad was tight. We had that bond you only get when you depend on each other for survival. There was Martinez, our driver. Best damn driver in the company, could maneuver a Humvee like it was an extension of his body. Wilson was our gunner. Quiet guy, but deadly accurate. Jackson was the joker. Always had some smart-ass comment that would crack us up even on the worst days. And Thompson, the new guy, only been with us for 2 months, still had that nervousness about him, jumping at every sound. It was July 22nd. I remember the date because it was my daughter's birthday. Olivia was turning 6 back home. I had called her the night before, promised I'd make it up to her when I got back. Just 3 more months, princess. I told her. Then Daddy will be home for a long time. I had already decided this would be my last deployment. 15 years was enough. I'd serve my 20 and then get out, be there for my family. That morning started like any other. It was already pushing 100 degrees at 0700 when we gathered for the mission brief. Standard patrol route through the outskirts of the city, checking in with some local informants, showing presence. We'd done it a dozen times before. All right, listen up, Captain Reynolds said, pointing to the map. We've had reports of increased activity in this sector. Nothing specific, just chatter. Keep your eyes open. Standard protocol, but nobody gets complacent. Clear? Hoo-ah! We all responded, some more enthusiastically than others. I remember checking my gear meticulously that morning. I always did, but something felt different. I kept going over everything twice. Extra magazines, kit, radio checks. I even wrote a quick note to my wife, Sarah, and tucked it in my breast pocket. Something I hadn't done since my first few missions years ago. Martinez noticed. You going superstitious on us, Sarge? I shook my head. Just being thorough. Uh-huh, he smirked. Your daughter's birthday's got you sentimental, that's all. He was probably right. I had this picture of Olivia in my helmet. Her school photo from kindergarten, gap-toothed smile, pigtails. I touched it briefly before we moved out. We left the wire at 0830. 3 Humvees in our convoy, mine in the middle. The first hour was uneventful. The usual tenseness, scanning rooftops, watching for disturbed earth on the roadside that might indicate an IED. The city was starting to come alive. Markets opening, people going about their business, kids watching us with that mixture of curiosity and wariness. We hit our first checkpoint, talked to some locals. Nothing unusual to report. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. Even with the AC in the Humvee, we were sweating through our gear. Man, I'd kill for a cold beer right now, Jackson said from the back seat. You'd kill for a warm beer, Wilson replied. Hell, you'd kill for O'Doul's. That's not even beer. That's just sad water, Jackson shot back. I half listened to their banter, my eyes constantly scanning. That's when I noticed something. The streets were emptying. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. The market area that had been bustling just 30 minutes ago was now nearly deserted. Martinez, slow down, I said, keying my radio. Lead vehicle, this is Bravo 2. Are you seeing this? Streets are clearing out. Roger that, Bravo 2. We see it. Proceeding with caution. That's when I felt it. That prickle on the back of your neck that veterans talk about. The sixth sense that develops when you've been in combat long enough. Something wasn't right. Everyone full alert, I ordered. Thompson, watch that alley on the right. The new guy nodded, his knuckles white on his rifle. We turned onto a wider road that ran alongside a canal. It was one of our usual routes back to base after this particular patrol pattern. The road was empty except for a single dump truck parked on the side about 100 meters ahead. Martinez saw it too. Sarge, I see it. Give it a wide berth. I radioed ahead. Lead vehicle, suspicious truck on right side. Recommend, I never finished that sentence. The world exploded. Later, they told me it wasn't the truck that was the bomb. It was an IED buried in the road that we triggered. The blast hit the lead Humvee directly and caught the right side of ours. I remember a flash of light, a deafening sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the world, and then we were airborne. Time slowed down in that moment. I could see Martinez's hands still gripping the wheel as we flipped. I could see the look of surprise on Thompson's face. I remember thinking, clear as day, Olivia's going to be so mad I missed her birthday. Then we hit the ground and everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. The first sensation I became aware of was pain. Crushing, all-encompassing pain. I couldn't move. I couldn't feel my legs. Something heavy was pressing on my chest. I tried to open my eyes, but only my right eye would comply. Through a red haze, I could make out the inside of the Humvee, now crushed and on its side. We'd rolled into the canal. Water was starting to seep in. I tried to call out, but all that came out was a gurgle. That's when I realized my mouth was full of blood. I tried to turn my head to see the others, but my neck wouldn't cooperate. The pain was becoming distant now, which somewhere in my mind I recognized as a bad sign. I could hear gunfire outside, muffled as if it were miles away rather than just outside our vehicle. Someone was shouting. I thought I heard my name. Eric. Eric, stay with me, man. It was Jackson's voice. He sounded panicked, which was unusual for him. Always the calm one in a firefight. I tried to respond, but nothing came out. My vision was starting to tunnel, the edges going dark. I felt very cold suddenly, despite the Iraqi heat. There was a strange moment of perfect clarity. I thought about Sarah, about how we'd met in high school, about our first apartment, barely more than a shoebox, but it was ours. About holding Olivia for the first time, this tiny pink thing that somehow contained the entire universe. I wasn't scared anymore, just sad. Sad that I wouldn't see them again. Sad that I'd broken my promise to come home. The darkness at the edges of my vision closed in completely, and the pain disappeared. The sounds of gunfire, of shouting, of the radio squawking, all of it faded away. And then there was nothing, except there was. I was still something. Conscious, aware. I didn't have a body anymore. At least I couldn't feel one. But I was still me. The darkness gave way to a soft gray light. It wasn't coming from anywhere specific, it just was. I had the strange sensation of moving, though I had no limbs to move with. It was like being carried by a current, gentle but insistent. Then suddenly I could see. I was floating above the scene. Below me was our convoy. Our Humvee was on its side, half in the canal. The lead vehicle was a burning wreck. The third had stopped, and soldiers were out, returning fire towards some buildings while others were attempting to reach our vehicle. I could see it all with perfect clarity, like watching it on a screen. I could see Jackson, who had been thrown clear, crawling toward the Humvee, his left arm hanging useless at his side. I could see Wilson's body lying motionless on the road. I could see Thompson trapped in the vehicle, still alive, bleeding badly from a head wound. And I could see Martinez, somehow still conscious, trying to pull himself out through the shattered windshield. And I could see myself. My body was still strapped in, crushed beneath twisted metal. My face was bloody, my legs pinned. Even from this perspective, I could tell I was in bad shape. The strangest part? I felt completely calm watching this, detached almost. Like I was observing something that happened long ago rather than right now. They can't hear you, you know. The voice came from beside me, or what would have been beside me if I'd had a physical form. I turned, or the equivalent of turning when you're just consciousness, and saw a figure. At first, it was just a presence, a concentration of that soft gray light. But as I focused on it, it took on a more defined shape. A man, maybe in his 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed impossibly ancient. Who are you? I tried to ask and was surprised to find I could communicate, even though I had no mouth to speak with. That's a complicated question, the figure replied, seeming amused. I'm a guide, you could say. A gatekeeper, maybe. Or just someone who's been where you are now. Am I dead? I asked. That's also complicated, the figure said. Your body is dying. Whether it actually dies depends on several factors. As the figure spoke, the scene below us began to change. The sounds of gunfire faded, and a strange shimmering appeared over everything, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. They're trying to save you, the figure noted, indicating the scene below where medics had now reached the Humvee and were working frantically. They're good at their jobs, but your injuries are severe. I can't feel anything, I said. That's normal. You're separated from your physical form right now. I watched as they extracted my body from the wreckage. Even from this vantage point, I could tell it wasn't good. My uniform was soaked with blood, and my legs were bent at angles they shouldn't be. Staff Sergeant Eric Dennison. The figure said, not as a question, but as if reading from some invisible file. 32 years old, husband to Sarah, father to Olivia, 15 years of service. How do you know that? I asked. The figure smiled. I know many things about you, Eric. I know you were planning to leave the Army after this deployment. I know you promised your daughter you'd be at her next birthday. I know you've killed 17 people in combat, and that the face of the first one still appears in your dreams sometimes. I would have shivered if I'd had a body. It was disconcerting, having a stranger, or whatever this was, know such intimate details about me. What is this? What's happening to me? The figure gestured, and the scene below us began to fade. In its place, a new landscape started to form. It wasn't solid at first, more like an impression, an idea of a place rather than the place itself. You're in between, the figure said simply. Not fully in the world you came from, not fully in the world that comes next. As the figure spoke, the landscape solidified. We were in a vast open space. It wasn't quite a desert, wasn't quite a plain. The ground beneath us, though I wasn't really standing on it so much as existing above it, was neither sand nor soil, but something in between. The sky, if you could call it that, was that same soft gray light, occasionally rippling with colors I couldn't name. Is this heaven? I asked hesitantly. The figure laughed, a warm, genuine sound. No, not heaven. Not hell either, before you ask. This is just a transitional space. A waiting room of sorts. I noticed now that there were others here. Not many, maybe a dozen or so, scattered across the landscape. Some appeared as clearly as my guide, while others were barely more than outlines, shimmering in and out of visibility. Ha ha ha. Who are they? Others like you. In between. Some will go back. Some will move on. One figure in particular caught my attention. Unlike the others who seemed to be wandering aimlessly or standing still, this one was walking purposefully in our direction. As it got closer, it took on a more defined shape, and I felt a jolt of recognition. Rodriguez? I gasped, or would have if I'd had breath. Specialist Miguel Rodriguez had been in my unit during my first tour in Iraq. He'd been killed by a sniper in Fallujah in 2004. I'd been the one to write to his parents. I'd been the one who'd packed up his personal effects to send home. He looked exactly as I remembered him. Lean with that perpetual half smile, his eyes always looking like he was in on some joke no one else got. Except now there was a peacefulness to him I'd never seen in life. Hey, Sarge, he said as he approached. His voice sounded just like it had in life, with that slight Texas drawl. Didn't expect to see you here so soon. I didn't expect to be here at all, I replied. Are you really Rodriguez? He grinned. In the non-flesh. I turned to my guide. I don't understand. Is this real? Or am I hallucinating all this while I bleed out in that Humvee? The guide shrugged. Does it matter? Whether it's happening in some objective reality or inside your dying brain, you're experiencing it either way. Rodriguez laughed. He's always like that. Never gives a straight answer. You know him? I asked, indicating the guide. Everyone here knows him, Rodriguez replied. Or someone like him. They take different forms for different people. I was about to ask more questions when suddenly the landscape around us shuddered. It was like an earthquake, except nothing actually moved. The very fabric of this place seemed to vibrate. What was that? I asked. They've got a pulse, my guide said, looking at something I couldn't see. They're administering blood products, trying to stabilize you for transport. Does that mean I'm going back? The guide and Rodriguez exchanged a look. It's not that simple, Sarge, Rodriguez said. There's more you need to understand first. The landscape shifted again, the featureless plain transforming. Now we were standing, or hovering, in what looked like a vast library. Endless shelves stretched in all directions, filled with books that glowed with a soft light. What is this place? I asked. Another way of perceiving the transitional space, my guide explained. Your mind is interpreting what it sees in ways it can comprehend. For you, right now, this is a library. These are lives, Rodriguez added, gesturing to the books. Every life that ever was, is, or will be. I moved toward the nearest shelf, drawn to a book that seemed to pulse with a familiar light. As I got closer, I knew instinctively it was mine. I reached for it, surprised to find I could interact with it despite my lack of a physical form, and it opened at my touch. Pages flipped rapidly, showing scenes from my life. My childhood in Minnesota, the day I enlisted, my wedding, Olivia's birth, deployments, friendships, arguments, moments of joy and sorrow. It was all there, every moment of my 32 years. But then the pages showed things I didn't recognize. Me older, at Olivia's high school graduation. Me with gray hair, teaching what looked like a military history class. Me and Sarah, elderly, sitting on a porch swing. These haven't happened yet, I said. They haven't happened yet for you, my guide corrected. Time works differently here. The book closed suddenly, the future pages sealing themselves before I could see more. You're not supposed to see all of that, Rodriguez said. No one is. It can change things. Change what? My future? Your choices, the guide said. Which is, in essence, the same thing. I looked around the vast library trying to comprehend the scale of it. So everyone's life is here? Every person who ever lived? Yes, my guide confirmed. Even the people who, the insurgents I killed? The guide nodded. Everyone. That hit me hard. In combat, it's easier not to think of the enemy as people with full lives, with families and hopes and fears. They're targets, threats to be neutralized. But here, seeing the endless shelves of lives, I couldn't escape the reality of it. Can I see their books? I asked hesitantly. Rodriguez put a hand on my shoulder, or what would have been my shoulder. That's not why you're here, Sarge. Why am I here then? I demanded, suddenly frustrated. What is the point of showing me all this if I'm just going to die anyway? Who said you were going to die? My guide asked. Before I could respond, the library shuddered, the shelves wavering like a mirage in the desert heat. What's happening? I asked. They're loading you onto a helicopter, the guide explained. Medevac to the combat support hospital in Baghdad. Your condition is critical but stable for now. So I'm not dead. Not yet, Rodriguez said. But we're running out of time here. Time for what? The guide moved to a different section of the library and we followed. Here the books were different, darker, heavier looking. These are the lives that ended too soon, the guide explained. Lives cut short by violence, by accident, by disease. Like mine, Rodriguez said quietly. The guide pulled a book from the shelf and handed it to me. It was Rodriguez's. When I opened it, I saw his life play out. His childhood in El Paso, his decision to enlist after 9/11, his time in our unit. Then it showed his death, the sniper's bullet catching him in the neck as we patrolled a street in Fallujah. But unlike my book, his continued past his death. It showed what would have been. Him coming home, meeting a woman named Lucia, having 3 children, becoming a firefighter. A full life that never happened. This is cruel, I said, closing the book. Why show me this? He's dead. That future was stolen from him. Yes, the guide agreed. It was. Just as futures are stolen from thousands every day. Some deaths come at their appointed time. Others come too soon, interrupting the natural flow. What does this have to do with me? The guide took Rodriguez's book and returned it to the shelf. Miguel's death came too soon? It wasn't his time, but such is the nature of war. It disrupts the natural order. And me? I asked. Is it my time? The guide looked at me with those ancient eyes. That's what you're here to find out. The library around us began to shift again, the shelves fading, replaced by a new setting. We were in a vast hall now, with high ceilings and walls that seemed to be made of light itself. At the center of the hall was what looked like a conference table, around which sat 7 figures. They were humanoid in shape but featureless, made of the same light as the walls. What is this place? I whispered to Rodriguez. The council, he replied. They're the ones who decide. Decide what? Whether you go back or move on. My guide led me toward the table. As we approached, the figures turned toward us, though they had no visible eyes to see with. Eric James Dennison. One of the figures spoke, its voice neither male nor female, young nor old. You stand at the crossroads. I don't understand, I said. What crossroads? Life and death. Another figure answered. Return or continuation? Your physical form is gravely injured, a third figure explained. The doctors are skilled, but your injuries are severe. Without intervention from our side, your survival is unlikely. So you decide whether I live or die? I asked, a surge of anger rising within me. What gives you that right? My guide placed a calming hand on my shoulder. It's not quite like that, Eric. They don't decide capriciously. There are patterns, flows to the universe. Sometimes when a life is interrupted unnaturally, adjustments can be made. Like mine, Rodriguez said. They don't often allow us to speak to the newly arrived, but they made an exception in your case. Because of our connection, I looked at my friend, confusion and frustration warring inside me. What am I supposed to do here? Plead my case? Beg for my life? We do not require begging, one of the council members said. We require understanding. Understanding of what? Of why you wish to return? Of what you would do with the time given back to you? Of whether your return serves the greater pattern? I fell silent, considering this. Why did I want to go back? The obvious answer was for Sarah and Olivia. But was that enough? If I don't go back, I asked slowly, what happens to me? You move on, my guide said simply, to what comes next. And what comes next? Heaven. Reincarnation? The guide smiled enigmatically. That's beyond my purview to explain. But I can tell you it's not an end. I thought about that. Not an end. Just a different journey. Part of me was curious. What was beyond this transitional space? What awaited on the other side? But then I thought of Sarah getting that knock on the door. I thought of Olivia growing up without her father. I thought of the promises I'd made. I want to go back, I said firmly. I have obligations, responsibilities. People who depend on me. Many who come here say the same. One of the council members noted, all have loved ones left behind. So what makes me special? I asked. Why would you even consider sending me back when you didn't do the same for others? For Rodriguez? Rodriguez stepped forward. That's not entirely accurate, Sarge. They did offer me a choice. I turned to him, stunned. What? You could have gone back? He nodded. They showed me what you just saw in my book, the life I could have had. But they also showed me something else. They showed me what my death would mean. I don't understand. My parents received my death benefit. With it, they paid off their mortgage and my sister's medical bills. She had leukemia, Sarge. The treatments were expensive. Without that money, she might not have made it. And because of what happened to me, you changed how the unit conducted patrols. You were more cautious. You saved lives, Sarge. Lives that would have been lost if I'd come back. I remember that. After Rodriguez died, I had indeed insisted on stricter protocols. More careful reconnaissance before entering unknown areas. Had that really saved lives? The thought was both comforting and devastating. So you chose to stay dead, for your sister. For me, yes, sir, for the unit? Rodriguez shrugged. I chose what seemed right at the time. What I believed would do the most good. I turned back to the council. And that's what this is about? What would do the most good? Whether my life or my death serves some greater purpose? In simple terms, yes. One of the figures replied. Then show me. I demanded. Show me what happens if I go back and what happens if I don't. Let me make an informed choice. The council members looked at each other, or seemed to, despite their featureless faces. There was a sense of silent communication passing between them. Finally, one spoke. Very well. We will show you two paths. But understand this, once shown, you cannot unsee. And the choice once made is final. The hall around us dissolved, and we were back in the featureless plane where I'd first arrived. But now two paths stretched out before us, shimmering with that same otherworldly light. The path on the left shows what will happen if you do not return. My guide explained. The path on the right shows what will happen if you do. What, but which would you like to see first? I hesitated. Both paths seemed equally daunting. Finally, I said, show me what happens if I don't go back. I need to know what I'd be leaving behind. My guide nodded and gestured toward the left path. As we moved toward it, the landscape changed again. We were in a funeral home, my funeral home. I could see my body in a casket, dressed in my Army service uniform, medals arranged on my chest. The room was filled with people, family, friends, fellow soldiers. Sarah sat in the front row, her face a mask of grief, holding Olivia's hand. My daughter looked confused, too young to fully comprehend what was happening. My parents were there, my father looking 10 years older than when I'd last seen him. Captain Reynolds Martinez, his arm in a sling. Jackson, all the surviving members of my unit. The scene shifted. Months had passed. Sarah was packing up our house, putting it up for sale. Olivia was acting out at school, getting in fights, her grades slipping. Sarah was struggling financially despite the death benefits, taking a second job to make ends meet. Years passed in a blur. Olivia as a teenager, rebellious, angry, blaming the Army, blaming me for leaving. Sarah eventually remarrying, a decent guy who treated them well, but could never quite bridge the gap with my daughter. Olivia joining the Army herself, despite her earlier resentment. perhaps trying to understand me or follow in my footsteps. The scenes were heartbreaking to watch. Not because everyone was miserable, they weren't. Life went on. Sarah found happiness again. Olivia eventually came to terms with her loss, became a strong, capable woman. But I wasn't there for any of it. I never saw my daughter grow up, never growing old with Sarah, never met my grandchildren. Yet mixed with these personal tragedies were other scenes. My death had affected my unit. Like Rodriguez's death had changed my leadership style, my loss changed something in Captain Reynolds. He became more vocal about certain operations, refused orders he deemed unnecessarily risky. His career suffered, but his actions saved lives. My memorial scholarship, set up by my parents at the local high school, helped several kids go to college who otherwise couldn't have afforded it. My name was added to a memorial wall, and at the dedication ceremony, Thompson, the new guy who had survived the ambush, spoke about how my leadership had inspired him. He'd gone on to become an officer, bringing the lessons he'd learned from me to a new generation of soldiers. It was a complex tapestry of joy and sorrow, of opportunities lost and new paths forged from tragedy. It wasn't all bad, far from it. Life went on without me as it always does. When the visions faded, I found myself back on the plane with my guide and Rodriguez. "That's what happens if I don't go back," I said quietly. "Now show me the other path." My guide nodded and directed me toward the right-hand path. As we approached it, new visions began to form. I saw myself in a hospital bed, broken but alive. Sarah at my bedside, tear-streaked but smiling. The doctors explaining my injuries: spinal damage, internal bleeding, multiple fractures, months of recovery ahead, rehabilitation, physical therapy, pain. The scenes shifted forward. Me in a wheelchair, then with a walker, then with a cane. The frustration, the setbacks, the small victories. Learning to walk again. The strain on my marriage as Sarah became both wife and caretaker. The nightmares, the PTSD, the medications. Olivia scared of her father's mood swings and outbursts. But then gradually improvement. Finding purpose in a veteran support group. Eventually becoming a counselor for other wounded warriors. Using my experience to help others through their darkest times. My relationship with Sarah tested, but ultimately strengthened. Being there for Olivia's milestones, graduations, wedding, the birth of her children. Like the other path, this one was mixed. There was suffering, yes. Recovery would be long and never complete. I would never be the same physically. But there was also joy, connection, purpose. A different life than I'd planned, but a life nonetheless. And like the other path, there were ripples beyond my personal sphere. The soldiers I counseled went on to help others. My advocacy for better veteran care led to small but meaningful policy changes. Thompson still became an officer, but in this reality, I was there to mentor him directly. When these visions faded, I was back on the plane again, stunned by what I'd seen. "Barry, both paths have meaning," my guide said softly. "Both have purpose. Neither is without pain nor without joy." "How am I supposed to choose?" I asked. "Both paths seem to have value." "That is why the choice is given to you," one of the council members said, suddenly present again. "We do not decide based on what is easy or painless. We decide based on what serves the pattern, what maintains the balance." "And in my case?" I asked. "What serves the pattern?" "In your case," the council member replied, "the pattern is balanced enough that either path would maintain it. Thus, the choice is truly yours." I looked at Rodriguez. "What would you do?" He smiled sadly. "It's not my choice to make, Sarge. And what was right for me might not be right for you." I closed my eyes, or the equivalent of that action in this formless state, and tried to think. The visions of both paths swirled in my mind. The grief of my family if I died. The pain of recovery if I lived. The ripples of influence spreading outward in either case. If I choose to go back, I said slowly, will I remember any of this? Some do, some don't. My guide answered. The human mind often protects itself by forgetting what it cannot reconcile with its understanding of reality. But something will remain, even if just as a feeling, an intuition. I thought about what I'd seen in both visions. About Sarah and Olivia. About the soldiers I'd helped in the second path. I thought about Rodriguez's choice, his sacrifice for his sister and the unit. I want to go back, I said finally. Not because it's easier, it might actually be harder. But because I promised them I'd come home. And if I can still do some good in the world, I want that chance. The council members seemed to confer silently again. Then one spoke. Your choice is acknowledged, Eric James Dennison. But understand this, the path shown to you is only a possibility. Free will remains. What happens when you return will be shaped by your choices and the choices of others. Nothing is guaranteed. I understand, I said. Life never comes with guarantees. There is one more thing. Another council member added. If you return, you must carry a message. A message? To who? To anyone who will listen. The message is this: no one walks alone. Not in life, not in death, not in what comes after. The connections between souls are the true reality behind all else. I don't understand, I admitted. What does that mean? My guide stepped forward. It means that what truly matters, what shapes the pattern we serve, are the relationships between beings. Love, compassion, forgiveness, understanding. These are not just human virtues. They are the fundamental forces that bind the universe together. And I'm supposed to tell people this? Who's going to believe me? Rodriguez laughed. That's not your problem, Sarge. Your job is just to carry the message. What others do with it is up to them. I considered this. It seemed like a small thing to ask in exchange for my life. All right, I'll carry your message. Not our message, the council member corrected. The message, it exists independent of us, of you, of all individual consciousness. It is the truth that underlies all truths. Before I could ask any more questions, the plane around us began to shimmer and fade. I felt a strange pulling sensation, as if some invisible cord attached to my being was being drawn taut. What's happening? I asked, suddenly alarmed. They've reached the hospital, my guide explained. You're going into surgery. It's time to decide, Eric. Once and for all. Do you go back or do you move on? I looked at Rodriguez one last time. Will I see you again? He smiled. Eventually, everyone meets again in one form or another. The connections never really break, Sarge. That's part of the message. I turned to my guide. I've made my choice. I want to go back. The guide nodded. Then it is done. The pulling sensation increased, becoming almost painful. The landscape around me, the guide, Rodriguez, the council, all began to blur and dissolve. Remember the message, Eric. My guide's voice echoed, growing fainter. No one walks alone. And then I was rushing backward, as if being pulled through a tunnel at impossible speed. There were flashes of light, snippets of sound, beeping machines, urgent voices. BP dropping. Push another unit. Hurry. We're losing him. Clear. A jolt of something that would have been pain if I'd been fully embodied. Then darkness again. But not the peaceful darkness from before. This darkness was filled with discomfort, with the awareness of a body broken and being repaired. I could feel tubes, needles, the pressure of bandages. I could hear the steady beep of monitors, the hum of equipment, the murmur of voices. I tried to open my eyes, but my lids felt weighted down. I tried to speak, but there was something in my throat. A tube. I was intubated, but I was alive. I had made it back. I thought I felt a hand holding mine, warm, familiar. Sarah? And somewhere deep in my mind, already fading like a dream upon waking, I heard the echo. No one walks alone. I don't know how many days passed before I fully regained consciousness. Time becomes fluid when you're heavily sedated. There were brief moments of awareness, snippets of conversations, the sensation of someone holding my hand, the distant beeping of machines. But mostly there was just darkness and confusion. When I finally did come to, it was Sarah's face I saw first. She was sitting beside my bed reading a magazine. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing what looked like the same clothes for several days. But to me, she was the most beautiful sight in the world. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the intubation, though the tube itself had been removed. Only a raspy grunt came out, but it was enough. Her head snapped up, eyes widening. Eric, she whispered as if afraid her voice might somehow break me. Eric, can you hear me? I managed a slight nod. That simple movement sent pain shooting through my neck and head, but I didn't care. I was alive. I was here. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She reached for a call button, pressed it repeatedly, then took my hand in hers, careful to avoid the IV lines. You're in Germany, she explained, her voice trembling. Landstuhl Medical Center. They flew you here after Baghdad. You've been unconscious for almost 2 weeks. 2 weeks. It hadn't felt that long. It had felt like only moments since I'd been speaking with my guide, with Rodriguez, with the council. But even as I tried to hold on to those memories, they were slipping away, like water through cupped hands. The details were blurring, the conversations fading. Only fragments remained. Rodriguez's face, the library of lives, the message. The message. What was it again? Something important. Something I'd promised to remember. A doctor rushed in, followed by a nurse. What followed was a blur of examinations, questions, answered with nods or shakes of my head, adjustments to my medication. They seemed pleased or at least relieved by my consciousness. "You're a fighter, Staff Sergeant," the doctor said, checking my pupils with a penlight. "When they brought you in, we weren't sure you'd make it through the first night." Sarah stayed by my side, clutching my hand like she was afraid I might slip away again if she let go. When the medical staff finally left, promising to return soon, she leaned close to me. "Olivia's with my parents," she said, answering the question I couldn't yet ask. "I didn't want to bring her until we knew more. She talks to you on the phone every day, though." "Well, I hold the phone to your ear while she talks." She attempted a smile. "She's mad that you missed her birthday, but she said she'll forgive you if you bring her a real German chocolate cake." I tried to smile back, but my face felt stiff, unresponsive. That's when I realized I couldn't feel my legs. Panic must have shown in my eyes because Sarah squeezed my hand tighter. "The doctor will explain everything," she said softly. "But you should know, your injuries were severe, Eric. Your Humvee rolled several times. You had internal bleeding, a collapsed lung, broken ribs, fractured vertebrae. They had to do surgery on your spine." She paused, struggling to find the words. "They don't know yet if you'll walk again. The swelling hasn't gone down enough to tell how much damage there is." I closed my eyes, letting this news wash over me. I should have been devastated. I should have been angry. But strangely, all I felt was a profound sense of gratitude. I was alive. Broken but alive. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered seeing this. The hospital, the injuries, the long recovery ahead. I'd been shown this path and had chosen it anyway. When I opened my eyes again, Sarah was watching me anxiously, waiting for some reaction to the news she'd just delivered. I squeezed her hand as firmly as I could and mouthed two words. "Worth it." She didn't understand what I meant. How could she? But she nodded anyway, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, pressing her forehead against our clasped hands. When the officers came to the door, I thought, I wished I could comfort her properly, hold her, tell her everything would be okay. But all I could do was lightly squeeze her hand and hope she understood. Over the next few days, my condition improved incrementally. I regained the ability to speak, though my voice was hoarse and weak. The doctors explained my injuries in excruciating detail. The L1 and L2 vertebrae were fractured with damage to the spinal cord. They'd inserted metal rods to stabilize my spine. 6 ribs were broken. My right lung had collapsed. My pelvis was fractured. Internal bleeding had nearly killed me before they could get it under control. I had a concussion and a hairline skull fracture. By all medical reasoning, I should have died on that Iraqi road. "Someone up there must like you, Staff Sergeant," one of the nurses commented as she checked my vitals. If only she knew. The memories of my experience while unconscious, or dead, or whatever I had been, were fading quickly. But certain images remained vivid. Rodriguez's face, the Council of Light, the 2 paths I'd been shown, and something else, something important I was supposed to remember. "No one walks alone." The words came back to me suddenly, clear as a bell. I said them aloud without meaning to. "What was that, honey?" Sarah asked. She'd been dozing in the chair beside my bed. "Nothing," I said. "Just something from a dream." But it wasn't a dream. At least it hadn't felt like one. It had felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. Yet how could I explain that to anyone? How could I tell them I'd died, spoken with the dead, been given a choice by beings of light? They'd assume it was the trauma, the medications, the brain's way of processing a near-death state. Maybe it was. Maybe that's all it had been. But it didn't feel that way to me. A week later, I was stable enough for visitors beyond Sarah. Martinez was the first to come. He walked in hesitantly, his arm still in a sling, his face bearing fading bruises and cuts. "Sarge," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Damn, it's good to see you awake." "Martinez," I rasped. "You look like hell." He laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You should see the other guy." Then more seriously, "How much do you remember?" I thought back to that day. The patrol, streets emptying, the dump truck. Then, the explosion. After that, nothing clear. Martinez nodded, pulling up a chair. "IED in the road. Got the lead vehicle bad. Wilson and Peters didn't make it. Our Humvee flipped, rolled down into that canal. Jackson got thrown clear, broke his arm and collarbone, got a nasty concussion, but he's okay now. Thompson took shrapnel to the face and chest, lost his right eye, but he's alive. I got the least of it, dislocated shoulder, some cuts and bruises. He paused, looking down at his hands. You got the worst of it, Sarge. When we pulled you out, I didn't think you were going to make it. You weren't breathing, no pulse. The medic had to do CPR right there while we were still taking fire. So I really had died, at least temporarily. That part wasn't just a hallucination. How long? I asked. How long was I gone? Martinez looked confused. Gone? Without a pulse. How long before they got me back? He furrowed his brow, thinking. 4, maybe 5 minutes? Felt like forever. The medic was about to call it when you suddenly gasped and came back. He shook his head. Freakiest thing I ever saw, man. Like watching Lazarus rise from the dead. 5 minutes without oxygen to the brain. By medical standards, I should have had severe brain damage, if I survived at all. Yet here I was, cognitive functions intact. Another miracle to add to the list. The others, I said. Wilson and Peters. Did they have families? Martinez's face fell. Yeah. Wilson had a wife, 2 kids. Peters was engaged. Wedding was supposed to be next month. He sighed heavily. Captain Reynolds is handling the notifications, writing the letters. I felt a wave of guilt. Why had I been given a choice to return when they hadn't? Why had I been granted this second chance? No one walks alone. The words echoed in my mind again. They didn't die alone, I said softly. Martinez looked at me strangely. What do you mean? I wasn't sure myself. The words had just come out. Nothing. Just thinking out loud. After Martinez left, promising to visit again soon and to bring Jackson next time, I found myself turning his words over in my mind. I had been clinically dead for several minutes. Long enough for, what? A hallucination? A dream? An actual journey to some spiritual realm? I asked the doctor about it the next day during his rounds. Is it normal to have vivid experiences when you're unconscious? Or when your heart stops? He looked up from my chart, studying me with newfound interest. You mean like a near-death experience? The white light, tunnel, that sort of thing? Something like that. He set the chart down and sat on the edge of the bed. It's more common than people think. Studies suggest anywhere from 10 to 20% of people who survive clinical death report some kind of experience. Some see lights or tunnels. Some report meeting deceased loved ones. Some describe out-of-body sensations. Do you think it's real? I asked. Or just the brain misfiring? He smiled diplomatically. That's more of a philosophical question than a medical one. Scientifically speaking, there are theories that it's just the brain's response to oxygen deprivation or the release of certain chemicals as the brain cells begin to die. But he paused, glancing at the door as if to make sure no one was listening. I've had enough patients describe these experiences with such conviction that I try to keep an open mind. Whatever it is, whether it's real in some objective sense or just a powerful subjective experience, it matters to the person who experiences it. Did you have such an experience, Staff Sergeant? I hesitated, then nodded. Would you like to talk about it? He asked. Part of me wanted to pour it all out. The guide, Rodriguez, the council, the 2 paths, the message. But another part held back. It felt too personal, too sacred somehow. And I was still processing it myself. Maybe another time, I said. He nodded understandingly. If you change your mind, there are specialists who study these phenomena. I can refer you. I thanked him, but I knew I wouldn't take him up on the offer. Whatever had happened to me, I wasn't ready to have it dissected and analyzed by researchers, no matter how well-meaning. 2 more weeks passed at Landstuhl. Physical therapy began. Brutal, exhausting sessions that left me drenched in sweat and often in tears from the pain and frustration. I still couldn't feel my legs, but the doctors remained cautiously optimistic. The swelling around my spine was gradually receding. There was some nerve response in my upper thighs. A good sign, they said. Finally, I was stable enough to be transferred back to the States. I was flown to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. Sarah flew back ahead of me to get Olivia and bring her to meet me at the hospital. The day of our reunion is one I'll never forget. I was set up in my new room, propped up in bed as comfortably as possible, a mix of anticipation and anxiety churning in my stomach. How would Olivia react to seeing me like this? Would I scare her? Would she understand? I heard her before I saw her, that high, excited voice carrying down the hallway. Is Daddy in here? Is he better now? Can he come home? Then Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding Olivia's hand. My little girl, looking somehow both exactly the same and impossibly different after just 2 months apart, was clutching a handmade card and a small stuffed bear. She hesitated when she saw me, taking in the hospital bed, the monitors, the tubes, the cast on my leg, the brace around my torso. Her eyes widened, and for a terrible moment, I thought she might burst into tears or run away. Instead, she looked up at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly, then let go of her mother's hand and walked slowly to my bedside. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice small but steady. "Hi, Princess," I replied, my own voice cracking. She held out the card and bear. "I made you a card, and this is Sergeant Bear. He's going to help you get better." I took them, my hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, sweetheart. I love them." She studied me seriously, her little brow furrowed. "Does it hurt a lot?" I considered lying, then thought better of it. "Sometimes it does, but the doctors give me medicine that helps." She nodded, processing this. "Mommy said you got hurt because some bad men put a bomb in the road." "That's right." "Why would they do that?" Sarah started to interrupt, probably thinking this was too much for me, but I shook my head slightly. Olivia deserved honest answers. "Some people are very angry and afraid," I said carefully. "And sometimes when people are angry and afraid, they do terrible things. But there are a lot more good people in the world than bad ones. You remember Martinez and Jackson who came to our house for the barbecue last year?" She nodded. "They helped save me. And so did the doctors and nurses and many other people. No one walks alone." There it was again, that message, shaping my words without me even trying. Olivia seemed to consider this. Then, with the simple acceptance that only children possess, she asked, "Can I sit with you?" Sarah started to object, concerned about my injuries, but I patted the small space beside me on the bed, very carefully on this side where Daddy doesn't have the cast. With Sarah's help, Olivia settled gently beside me, curling against my good side. The weight and warmth of her small body brought tears to my eyes. This moment, this connection, this was why I had chosen to come back. The next few months were a grueling cycle of surgeries, physical therapy, pain management, and small incremental victories. Sensation slowly returned to my legs. First just pins and needles, then actual feeling. By month 3, I could move my toes. By month 5, I could bend my knees. The doctors were now confident I would walk again, though likely with assistance. But while my body was slowly healing, my mind was struggling. The nightmares started about 2 months after I arrived at Walter Reed. Vivid, horrifying dreams of the explosion, of being trapped in the crushed Humvee, of watching Wilson and Peters die. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, convinced I was back in Iraq. On top of that, there were flashbacks during the day. A car backfiring outside the hospital window would send me into a full-blown panic attack. The clatter of a meal tray being dropped sounded like gunfire to my hyper-vigilant brain. I developed a fear of enclosed spaces that made MRI machines a special kind of torture. The doctors diagnosed PTSD, which came as no surprise. They started me on medication and therapy. The meds helped somewhat with the anxiety and depression that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. But they also made me feel foggy, disconnected. Sarah was my rock through all of it. She took a leave of absence from her job as an elementary school teacher, rented a small apartment near the hospital, and enrolled Olivia in a local school. Every day she would come to the hospital, help with my exercises, read to me when I was too tired to focus, and simply sit with me when the darkness felt overwhelming. But even she couldn't truly understand what I was going through. The physical pain I could explain, but the psychological torment was harder to put into words. And the spiritual upheaval, the questions about life and death, purpose and meaning that my near-death experience had awakened, those I kept mostly to myself. The memories of that experience were continuing to fade, like a dream upon waking. But the core of it remained: Rodriguez, the council, the 2 paths, and the message. No one walks alone. I still didn't fully understand what it meant or how I was supposed to share it. 6 months after the explosion, I was moved to outpatient status. We rented a wheelchair-accessible apartment near the hospital, and I continued daily therapy as an outpatient. I could now stand with assistance and take a few halting steps with a walker, though the pain was still significant. That's when the depression hit hardest. At the hospital, surrounded by medical professionals, I'd been able to focus on the immediate tasks: the next therapy session, the next medication, the next small goal. But at home, the reality of my situation became inescapable. This was my life now. I might never run again, never play soccer with Olivia, never make love to Sarah without calculated movements and careful positioning to avoid pain. I started pushing people away. I snapped at Sarah for the smallest things, I was impatient with Olivia when she was too loud or energetic. I stopped taking calls from Martinez and Jackson, who had both been regularly checking in on me. One night after I'd barked at Sarah for rearranging my medications, which she'd done to make them easier for me to reach, she finally broke down. "I can't do this anymore, Eric," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I can't keep trying to help you when you treat me like the enemy. I'm not the one who put that bomb in the road. I'm not the one who hurt you. You think I don't know that?" I shot back. "You think I want to be like this? You think I enjoy being half a man, a burden to everyone around me?" "You're not a burden," she cried. "You're my husband. We promised for better or worse, remember? This is the worst part, but we can get through it. If you'd let me in." "Let you in?" I laughed bitterly. "You want me to let you in?" "Fine. You want to know what it's like inside my head? I died, Sarah. I actually died on that road. No pulse, no breathing. And while I was gone, I saw things. Things I can't explain. Things that sound crazy even to me. I talked to Rodriguez, you remember him? The specialist from my first tour who was killed? He was there, and there were these beings. I don't even know what to call them. They showed me what would happen if I died and what would happen if I came back. And I chose this pain, this half-life, because I thought it would be worth it to be with you and Olivia. But some days I'm not so sure anymore. I hadn't meant to say all that. It had just poured out of me, months of bottled up thoughts and feelings. I expected Sarah to look at me like I was crazy, to back away, maybe to call the psychiatrist. Instead, she sat down on the couch beside my wheelchair and took my hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. "Because it sounds insane," I replied. "Because I barely understand it myself. Because I'm supposed to be the strong one, the one who protects you, not some broken shell of a man who sees dead people." She was quiet for a long moment, still holding my hand. Then she said, "Did you know my grandmother had a near-death experience during surgery when I was about Olivia's age?" I stared at her. "No, you never told me that." She didn't talk about it much. But once when I was in college, she told me the whole story. She said she left her body, watched the doctors working on her from above, then went through a tunnel to a place of light where she met her father, who had died in World War II. He told her it wasn't her time yet, that she needed to go back for her family. She said that experience completely changed how she saw life and death. I was speechless. All this time, Sarah had this connection to what I'd experienced, and I'd never known. "I'm not saying I understand exactly what you went through," she continued. "I don't, but I believe you experienced something real, and I want to hear about it, all of it, whenever you're ready to share." That night, for the first time since the explosion, I told someone the full story of my near-death experience. I told Sarah everything I could remember. The guide, Rodriguez, the council, the library of lives, the two paths, the message. I told her about choosing to come back, about the pain and recovery I knew awaited me, about the message I was supposed to carry. She listened without interruption, holding my hand, occasionally nodding or wiping away a tear. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "No one walks alone," she repeated thoughtfully. "I like that message. But what does it mean?" I asked. "How am I supposed to share it? Who would even listen to me?" She squeezed my hand. "I think you'll know when the time is right. And I think people will listen because it's coming from someone who's been to the edge and back. Your experience gives you a perspective few people have." That conversation marked a turning point. I wasn't magically healed. The physical pain, the PTSD, the depression were still there. But I had opened up, let Sarah in, shared the burden. And in doing so, I had taken the first step toward understanding the message I was meant to carry. No one walks alone. Maybe it started with me. Maybe I needed to accept that I wasn't meant to bear this alone. After that, I started making different choices. I apologized to Olivia for my impatience and made a conscious effort to be present with her, even on my worst pain days. I called Martinez and Jackson, reconnecting with my military brothers. I opened up to my therapist about my near-death experience, finding her unexpectedly receptive and supportive. A year after the explosion, I took my first unassisted steps. They were wobbly, painful, and I could only manage a few before needing to rest. But they were mine. The doctors were now confident I would eventually walk with just a cane, though I would likely always have some pain and limitation. Around that time, I was approached about participating in a peer support program for wounded warriors. The idea was for veterans further along in their recovery to mentor those just beginning the process. When the program coordinator described it to me, I immediately thought of the message. No one walks alone. This was a way to embody that. My first mentee was a Marine who had lost both legs to an IED in Afghanistan. He was angry, bitter, pushing everyone away, exactly as I had done. When I wheeled into his hospital room that first day, he barely looked at me. "Let me guess," he said sarcastically. "You're here to tell me it gets better?" "No," I replied honestly. "Some days it doesn't get better. Some days it gets worse. Some days you'll wish you died over there. I can't promise you it gets better, but I can promise you don't have to go through it alone." He finally looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition maybe, connection. "How long's it been for you?" he asked. "A year and 2 months," I told him, "and I still have days when I want to give up. But I don't because I made a promise." "To who?" "Your wife? Your kids?" I hesitated, then decided to take a risk. "To myself, and to whoever or whatever gave me a second chance." He studied me for a long moment. "You believe in God?" "I believe in something," I said carefully. "I had a near-death experience when I was injured. I don't have all the answers, but I know I came back with a purpose." I expected him to scoff, to dismiss me as some religious nut. Instead, he said, "I think I might have had something like that too. When the explosion happened, there was this moment where I was floating above my body, watching them work on me. I could see my legs were gone, but I didn't feel anything about it. Just this peace. Then I was back in my body and everything hurt, and I've been angry ever since. It was the opening I needed." We talked for hours that day, not just about near-death experiences, but about pain management, phantom limb sensations, navigating relationships when you're not the same person you were before. By the time I left, something had shifted between us. A connection had formed. As I mentored more wounded warriors, I began to recognize a pattern. Many of them, regardless of their religious beliefs or lack thereof, had experienced something unusual during their brush with death. Some had clear near-death experiences like mine. Others had more subtle experiences, a sense of presence, a moment of perfect clarity or peace amidst the chaos, a voice or thought that didn't seem to be their own. I started sharing my story more openly, first with these veterans, then with support groups for military families, then eventually with medical staff and therapists working with wounded warriors. I didn't push any particular interpretation of my experience. I simply told what had happened to me, what I had seen and heard, and the message I had brought back. No one walks alone. To my surprise, people listened. Not everyone, of course. There were skeptics, those who politely, or not so politely, suggested it had all been a hallucination, a dream, my brain's way of processing trauma. But many people, more than I expected, resonated with the message. 2 years after the explosion, I retired from the Army with a medical discharge and full disability benefits. By then, I was walking with a cane most days, though I still used the wheelchair for longer distances or on particularly bad pain days. Sarah, Olivia, and I moved back to Minnesota, close to both our families. We bought a small, single-story house that we modified to be fully accessible, just in case my condition worsened as I aged. I continued mentoring wounded warriors through a nonprofit organization, sometimes traveling to VA hospitals around the country to speak with recently injured veterans. I also started writing, first just for myself as a form of therapy, but eventually with the idea of publishing a memoir about my experiences. 3 years after the explosion, I got a call from Thompson. After recovering from his injuries, he had remained in the Army, eventually becoming an officer as I'd seen in the vision of my future. He was calling because he was helping to organize a reunion for our unit, and he wanted me to be there. "I don't know, Thompson," I hedged. "Travel is still tough for me, and large gatherings can trigger my PTSD. "I understand, Sarge," he said, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice. "But there's something else. Martinez has been having a rough time. He never really dealt with what happened that day. I think seeing you might help him. No one walks alone." The words echoed in my mind again. "Where and when?" I asked. The reunion was held at a hotel near Fort Stewart, Georgia, where our unit had been based. Sarah came with me for support, while Olivia stayed with her grandparents. I was nervous about seeing everyone again, about how they would react to my changed appearance, about whether the event might trigger flashbacks. When we arrived at the hotel ballroom where the reunion was being held, I hesitated outside the door. Sarah squeezed my hand. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," she said. I took a deep breath. "No, I need to, not just for Martinez, but for me too." When we walked in, me with my cane, moving slowly but under my own power, the room fell silent for a moment. Then Captain Reynolds, now Major Reynolds, approached me, hand extended. "Staff Sergeant Dennison," he said formally, then broke into a grin. "Damn, it's good to see you on your feet." After that, I was surrounded by my old unit, shaking hands, accepting hugs, catching up on the past 3 years. Some had left the military, others had redeployed to Afghanistan or elsewhere. Some were married now, had kids, had moved on with their lives. Eventually, I found Martinez sitting alone at a table in the corner, nursing a beer. He looked older than his years, with a weariness in his eyes that I recognized all too well. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. He looked up startled, then gestured to the empty chair. "Be my guest, Sarge." I sat down, resting my cane against the table. "Thompson tells me you've been having a rough time." Martinez shrugged, looking down at his beer. "No rougher than anyone else, I guess." "That's bullshit, and we both know it," I said bluntly. "I've mentored enough combat vets to recognize the signs. You're not sleeping. You're probably drinking too much. You jump at loud noises. You avoid crowds. How am I doing so far?" He glanced up at me, a flash of anger in his eyes, then resignation. "Pretty much nailed it. Have you talked to anyone? Via counselor? Therapist?" He shook his head. "What's the point? They didn't go through what we did. They don't understand." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But it still helps to talk. And if you won't talk to them, talk to me. I was there, remember?" Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "Then, I dream about it almost every night. Not just the explosion, but after. When we were trying to get you out, you weren't breathing, Sarge. Your eyes were open, but there was nothing there. I thought for sure you were gone." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "And sometimes in the dreams, we don't get you back. We try CPR, but it doesn't work. And other times, it's not you in the Humvee, it's me. And no one can get me out. And the water's rising, and I can't breathe." He broke off, his voice cracking. I waited, giving him space. "I should have seen it coming," he finally said. "The IED, the empty streets. I should have recognized the signs. Ah, there it was. The guilt, the second-guessing, the what-ifs that haunt survivors." "Martinez," I said quietly, "I was the senior NCO. If anyone should have recognized the signs, it was me. But the truth is, sometimes there's nothing you can do. Sometimes, no matter how well-trained you are, no matter how vigilant, bad things happen." He still wouldn't look at me. "Wilson and Peters died. You nearly died. Thompson lost an eye. All because I didn't spot a fucking IED. All because insurgents planted an IED," I corrected firmly. "You don't get to take responsibility for their actions." I hesitated, then decided to take another risk. "Do you remember Specialist Rodriguez? From my first tour?" Martinez nodded. "The guy who got hit by the sniper in Fallujah? You mentioned him sometimes." "When I was unconscious after the explosion, I saw him." Martinez finally looked up, his expression a mixture of confusion and interest. "I had a near-death experience," I explained. "I saw Rodriguez. We talked. He told me something important, something I've held on to. What happened to him, his death, served a purpose. It changed how we operated, made us more cautious, probably saved lives. Just like what happened to us has already changed how the units in that area operate. The pain we went through wasn't for nothing." Martinez was staring at me now, trying to decide if I was crazy or just trying to make him feel better. "I know how it sounds," I admitted. "But whether you believe it was real or just my brain's way of processing trauma, the message is the same. No one walks alone. What happens to each of us affects everyone connected to us. And we have a responsibility to carry each other when the load gets too heavy." I reached across the table, put my hand on his arm. "You've been carrying this alone for too long, brother. Let me help. Let others help. That's why we're all here tonight." Martinez looked at me for a long moment, then around the room at our fellow soldiers, then back to me. Something in his expression shifted, softened. "I wouldn't even know where to start," he said. "Start by talking to me," I said, "and then maybe to a counselor. One step at a time, just like physical therapy." He nodded slowly. "Okay, maybe I can try that." By the end of the evening, Martinez had agreed to call me weekly and to make an appointment with a VA counselor. It wasn't a miraculous cure, but it was a beginning, a connection reestablished, a burden shared. As Sarah and I flew home the next day, I thought about how the message had guided me over the past 3 years. No one walks alone. I had lived it in my own recovery, leaning on Sarah, on my therapists, on my fellow veterans. I had shared it with the wounded warriors I mentored, and now I had offered it to Martinez. The message wasn't just about comforting the dying or reassuring those who'd had near-death experiences. It was about how we live, connected to each other, responsible for each other, carrying each other through the darkest times. 5 years after the explosion, my memoir was published. I titled it "No One Walks Alone: A Soldier's Journey Through Death and Back." In it, I detailed not only my near-death experience, but the long, painful recovery that followed. The PTSD, the depression, and the purpose I eventually found in helping others. The book found an audience beyond what I'd expected. Not just veterans and their families, but people who'd had their own brushes with death, people struggling with trauma or disability, people questioning the nature of life and what might come after. I started receiving letters from readers sharing their own stories. Some had had near-death experiences remarkably similar to mine. Others found resonance in my description of PTSD and recovery. Many just wanted to thank me for putting into words something they had felt but couldn't express. One letter in particular stands out in my memory. It was from a woman in Florida whose son had been killed in Afghanistan 3 years earlier. "I've been angry at God, at the Army, at the world since losing my boy," she wrote. "But your book helped me see things differently. The idea that no one walks alone, that we're all connected, even beyond death, has brought me comfort I never expected to find. I still miss my son every day, but I no longer feel that he's simply gone. Somehow, in some way I can't fully understand, he's still connected to me and to everyone his life touched." That letter, and many others like it, confirmed what I had come to believe. The message I'd been given wasn't just for me. It was meant to be shared, to bring comfort and perspective to others struggling with the great questions of life, death, and purpose. 7 years after the explosion, Sarah and I welcomed our second child, a son we named Miguel after Rodriguez. By then, I was walking with just a cane most days, though I still had chronic pain and would always have certain limitations. But I had found a way to live with purpose despite those limitations. I continued mentoring wounded warriors, speaking at VA hospitals and military bases, and writing about my experiences. I started a nonprofit organization called No One Walks Alone that paired combat veterans struggling with PTSD and physical injuries with peer mentors who had been through similar experiences. Martinez became one of our first mentors after working through his own PTSD with counseling and support. Thompson, now a captain, helped establish connections with active duty units to identify service members who might need support before they reach crisis points. 10 years after the explosion, I was invited to speak at a conference on combat trauma and spirituality at Walter Reed. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the audience of medical professionals, chaplains, therapists, and wounded warriors, I was struck by how far I had come from that broken man in the hospital bed, questioning whether life was worth the pain of recovery. 10 years ago, I died on a road in Iraq when our Humvee hit an IED and rolled into a canal. For approximately 5 minutes, I had no pulse, no respiration. During those 5 minutes, I experienced something that defies conventional explanation. I met a guide, spoke with a fallen comrade, and was given a choice between moving on to what comes next or returning to a broken body and a difficult recovery. I paused, looking around the room. Some faces showed skepticism, others curiosity, others recognition. I chose to come back, knowing the pain and struggle that awaited me. I chose it because I had people I loved who needed me, and because I was given a message to carry back, a message I've spent the last decade trying to understand and share. I took a breath, feeling the familiar ache in my spine, the constant reminder of that day. No one walks alone. Those 4 simple words have shaped my recovery, my perspective on life and death, and my purpose in this world. They remind me that we are all connected, to each other, to those who came before us, to those who will come after. They remind me that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. Looking out at the audience, I saw some wiping away tears, others nodding in recognition, a few still looking skeptical but engaged. Whether you believe my experience was a genuine glimpse beyond the veil, or simply a powerful hallucination caused by trauma and oxygen deprivation, doesn't really matter. The message remains true either way. No one walks alone. We need each other. We carry each other. We save each other. I thought of Rodriguez, of Wilson and Peters, of Martinez and Thompson, of all the wounded warriors I had mentored over the years, of Sarah and Olivia and little Miguel waiting for me at home. I died in Iraq when our Humvee flipped, and I came back with a message. I concluded, the message wasn't just for me, and it isn't just for you. It's for all of us, a reminder of the connections that define our humanity. No one walks alone, not in life, not in death, not in what comes after. Remember that, share it, live it. As I stepped away from the podium to applause, I felt a sense of peace that had been building gradually over the years. I would never know with absolute certainty what had happened to me during those 5 minutes when my heart stopped beating. I would never be able to prove to skeptics that what I experienced was real, but I knew what the experience had given me: purpose, perspective, and a message that had brought comfort to countless others over the past decade. For me, that was enough. More than enough. No one walks alone. The words that had once seemed mysterious now felt like the simplest, most profound truth I knew. We are all connected to each other, to those who came before, to those who will come after, to whatever awaits beyond this life. In that connection lies our strength, our comfort, and ultimately, our salvation. I had died in Iraq when our Humvee flipped. I had come back with a message. And in carrying that message and living it every day, I had found not just a reason to return, but a reason to keep going, no matter how difficult the path.